Hey, mushroom lovers. We are back with Lori Rice, who is the founder of Fake Food Free Productions and Creating You online courses. She's a food photographer and writer working with food brands, agricultural boards, and publishers. She is the photographer and author of 2 of her own cookbooks. Today, she will be joining us to talk all about photographing mushrooms to make sure you have beautiful images to share on your website and recipes and with customers to entice them to buy more mushrooms. Welcome, Lori.
Thanks. Great to be here. Yeah.
So photographing mushrooms, it's simple. I mean, you just take out your camera and take pictures, right?
Sure. Sometimes you get lucky. Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about how you can shoot good photos like that, but we're going to talk about some super simple changes you can make to create great photos.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, because I know there is so many times you see a beautiful mushroom, you're like, oh, that's so pretty. And you pull out your phone, you take a picture of it, and then the photo just doesn't look like the mushroom did. And so you're so disappointed. So take it away. Let's talk all about photographing mushrooms.
All right. So one of the things about mushrooms is that they are, they're so beautiful, but they're also very neutral in color. So there's a lot of things to think about here. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about tips for photographing your harvest and making your mushrooms shine. So we're going to cover 3 main things today. So we're going to talk about the basics of creating better photos with farm fresh foods in general, which will apply to mushrooms. Then we're going to talk about the tips for styling and photographing fresh mushrooms. And then we'll talk about some tips for styling and photographing cooked mushrooms so you can pair those with the recipes that you're creating. So I want to cover just a couple things here. There are a few things that you do not need for better photos. Artificial lighting. I'm actually about a 98% natural light photographer. I prefer natural light so much more. And you don't necessarily need a professional camera unless you're creating a book or massive billboards or what have you. They have their place, and I'm not trying to lessen the work that I do. But I will say for your websites and your social media accounts, these tips that I'm going to show you are going to help even just your iPhone photos just really shine and stand out. Now, some things that you do need. You need a knowledge of how to maximize natural light. You need a basic understanding of composition, just super simple, and we're going to cover that. And then a preferred look for your brand. And I'll talk about this as it comes into your photos, but this may be something that you've already covered if you're deep into your business, but it's definitely something to think about with the photos you're creating and putting out there. So I always like to cover a myth whenever it comes to photography. And we're going to start here talking about maximizing your natural light. Is that we often think that shooting outdoors gives us the perfect light for our images. So we know we need light. We think if we go outside that we're going to have more light, so all will be good. But the truth of the matter is that outdoor sets often need to be controlled as much and sometimes even more than indoor sets. And I'm going to give you a few examples here of how that works for produce in general, but then also for mushrooms. So what we want to do is we need to control our directional light. We want to control the light so that it creates dimension within our image. The easiest way to control the light is with black and white foam boards. Super inexpensive. And then clips, like what you can see here on the ground. Those are, I think they're called pony clips. You can get them at, hardware stores. I like to use the kind pictured here because they're nice and sturdy. But that's all you need to control light. And if you don't have those, you can also use things like permanent structures. Like if I would push this photo up against the fence there, or if you have some pots outside that are kind of blocking the light if you're shooting on the ground. And if you need a whiteboard, I'll show you here a whiteboard and how that works. You can sometimes use a piece of paper. I joke and I talk to a lot of people that I teach that this is my most used piece of equipment in my studio. And it is about the size of a piece of paper and it's like card stock. And I use it all the time because it's small.
The black foam boards, where do you get those?
You can get them at any kind of art supply store and even places like Target. You don't need super thick, but you do need them to be thicker than a poster board because you don't want them to flop over. Yeah. So, so that they'll stand up. Yeah.
Perfect.
And you can find them in whiteboard as well and in lots of different sizes. And you can also buy larger ones and cut it, like if you wanted a small one like this.
Perfect.
So I'll go back to some changes you can make with those blackboards. I just wanted to show you this whiteboard really quickly and how I use it. Like this is dried figs. California figs is one of my clients that are shooting dried mission figs all of the time. And you really have to bounce the light for it to glisten. And so those little boards and setting them right up, if you're shooting a shot, you know, even with just your phone and it seems really dark, put that to a point where it's not in the image and it's going to opposite where your light's coming in. It's going to bounce that light back and really open up those spaces with a little bit of light. And it works for mushrooms too, because a lot of times we have those dark crevices in there. Okay, so I'm going to show you this image first, then I'll show you, I showed you the boards previously, how those boards were set up when I was overhead, but I want to show you the difference in the shots here. So with lemons, these on the left were no boards at all. And so what you can see is they're bright, and you might like this image. It's a fine, it's fine image the way that it turned out. But what we add when we add those boards is we add detail and dimension. So, if you were zoomed in on this photo, you would see it a bit better, but there's more rounding to the lemons. There's some indentations that are starting to come out, and they just have a bit more dimension, and they're not just bright. So that's one reason why you would use the blackboards, and it becomes important outdoors too, because you have all of this light coming from all directions, and you really have to help control it and create some shadow in your images. So let me show you mushrooms specifically here. So I took this shot in my studio just on the floor here on some painted canvas. And so I have these boards, and it's, you can be extremely, I don't know what word I want to use, but maybe unprofessional. My boards are just stacked, leaning up against each other. It's a very easy process to do. It's not complicated, not super fancy. So by putting those boards there and you have backlight coming, in my studio, which I'm in my studio here, I get light. My windows are over here, but I get light from the doors and the glass doors on the other side. So by blocking that there on the bottom, I'm blocking the light that's coming from another direction, and it's adding some dimension to the overhead shot of the mushrooms. Mm-hmm. So super simple. The best thing to do is just experiment with it. The way the light's coming in, it might be perfect just for you to snap. But try some boards and see how it looks, what changes it makes, and experiment with it. All right, let's move on to the basics of composition. Now, there are many, many composition rules that you can follow. Some of them are with landscape and nature photography, and they translate some to food photography. But the one that you always want to start with, I feel like you should always start with, and most people will teach first, is the rule of thirds. Because it's a super simple way to make your images stand out and give them, character and to draw the eye. And I'm going to show you here how easy it is to apply. So this is basically the rule of thirds. So we have, every time you look through your camera or you look at your phone screen, break it into a grid like this. And if we're vertical, just flip this. But basically what you want is you want your point of focus to be on one of these 4 dots or very near it. So what that does is it takes an image that you're shooting directly and it just kind of shifts it just a little bit. So your eyes go this way, this way, this way, or this way. So that's what we're doing with the rule of thirds. When it comes to an image, this is a potato mushroom soup. And so you can see here as it's overlaid on the soup, the upper left circle is where I had my point of focus. I had pulled that mushroom out, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. And I made sure my point of focus was on there and it was super sharp. And what that does is it moves the image up just a little bit and creates some interest. Now that doesn't mean you can't take straight on shots. I've taken plenty of, spot center, beautiful produce shots that I love, but in general, experiment with the rule of thirds when you're moving your camera or your phone just to get an image with more interest. So there's that spot that I was speaking of. And then here's just the image as it was. We're going to come back to how to style those mushroom recipes in just a second, but I want to just touch on your brand and your brand vision whenever it comes to your photos. And it's not something that it has to be hard and concrete, but it's something to think about as you go on. So does your brand and your farm and what you're growing, does it have a farmhouse rustic vintage feel? Like, is that what you're trying to put out there? Is that the feeling that you're trying to, pull your customers in with and appeal to customers that are drawn to that? So images like this, you're going to use you can be a bit brighter, like this image here on the left, but it's still wood. There's rustic herbs. On the right, we have a vintage spoon. We have another wood service, kind of blues and grays working there. Or do you think that you want to appeal more to the bright modern kitchen, something, that's trending in new design right now? You can't see it very well in the burger image, but that's from my kitchen. There's subway tile. And so white plates, lots of things. It doesn't mean that you can't put in some rustic touches like the board, but you can definitely tell that those images go in a particular direction. And it's good to have a little bit of consistency with that direction so that people start to identify it with your brand.
And Lori, you would say that it also going to play off your logo, with the style of your logo, just the feel of your brand. Like, we have an 1890s old brick farmhouse. And what kind of style would you recommend for us?
Yeah, I would stick with that farmhouse. I mean, farmhouse is kind of a word we often use to describe some of the more rustic and kind of vintage looking photos like those that were before. But it would be something more like this that would have that warming, comforting kind of feel. That's what I would go with in your case. But what that also means is that this is like a two-way street in the sense of you're pouring yourself into the brand, but then you're also attracting those people that are drawn to that particular style as well. There are a lot of people that are drawn to all styles. I'm one of those people. So you have to think about that too. But yeah. Okay, let's move on to photographing fresh mushrooms. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of the tips that I apply when I'm shooting just mushrooms as they are, not cooked. So of course we have the option, and if it's possible, I highly recommend some photos of the growing process, where mushrooms come from. This is one of the things with my ag clients that I just encourage so much, because still so many people just don't understand how food is coming, how it comes about. And it's so interesting for people to see. So think about snapping some of those shots of how your mushrooms are growing. Some people steer away from this because, it's a dirty process, or, whatever the case may be. And I just think that the real honesty of it and what really is happening, I just think it draws an ideal customer in my opinion, and it really educating them makes them more interested in your product. And then I like to do a lot of shots of just like individual mushrooms. So I'll talk just a little bit about when I'm doing that and what I do. So first of all, wipe them clean if you're trying to shoot a clean image, if they're out of harvest and things like that. And I will wipe them clean if they look a bit dry and they aren't catching the light. The reason we want to either spritz a bit of water or rub with olive oil, and I always use an edible oil so that you can cook them later, is it catches light that's coming in and the crevices and the different details. So if things are looking kind of blah, like these don't have anything on them. So I like the way they look super rustic. But if I was wanting a bit more glisten or something like that, I have little tiny water bottles that you can spritz with, or just put some olive oil on a rag that's not going to transfer any lint and just kind of rub it over. Now, when it comes to mushrooms too, some varieties, of course, they're really tightly grown. And so whenever you photograph them, I kind of like to open them up a little bit, like especially like oyster, maitake, those kind of things, so that you can see in between and just like see really what it looks like inside. And it also helps people kind of translate that to like how they would eat them, what they could put them in, the preparation. And this is just a quick shot in my studio. And these came from the grocery store out of a bag. So they're not the most beautiful specimens. They're a little bit wrinkly, but I flip different sides. So you grab pieces, pull a piece off, flip it. You might have your bunch and then a few pieces around it. Really give people an idea of what it looks like. And then I wanted to talk a little bit with fresh mushrooms about both creating displays, but then also photographing those displays so that you have them to use in your marketing. This is a huge display, I know. I had the opportunity to go to Meredith and Time Studios, food studios in Birmingham with the Mushroom Council, one of my clients, to help promote some of the recipes I developed and photographs I taken. And so we had access to all these mushrooms. But the reason why I wanted to show this here, and this is inside, so we're not looking at good light here, but it's pretty impressive. And even if you have a smaller space, that's totally fine, but put some different varieties in there, mix them up. You want to have a little bit of length, but then also some height and dimension. So there's boxes in the back where they're stacked up. We have props where there's a couple things, a little bit higher. So this can be really appealing when you set it up, but then also if you get in there and you're taking photos of it, you have plenty of photos to use for your marketing. And then I want to talk just a little bit about building baskets and boxes, because sometimes we think that we need like loads and loads of our product to create beautiful images. And I want to show you a few examples of how to do this. So first of all, I really like to mix in simplicity and focus on mushrooms and pieces of produce by leaving negative space. And so I have, and I'm sure you probably do too, I have a lot of pretty baskets and bowls, and some of them are wicker, some of them are wire. And I have some handmade pottery that has great detail on the bottom in their big bowls. Use that to complement a few mushrooms. So in this case, this is actually a bread rising basket, which I use to shoot in sometimes, but I love how the color complements with the shiitake mushrooms. But I didn't like fill the entire bowl with mushrooms. I let some of that side and that negative space in the bowl complement the mushrooms, and then people really see that mushroom and they focus in on it. So experiment with that. You don't always need to have a full overflowing bowl. But if you would like to create just a little bit more abundance, whether you're working with a bowl or a box, false bottom your bowl. And I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but I wanted to bring it up. For this particular purpose, all you need is just some crumpled up brown paper. In food styling, we do this all of the time when we want to use a big bowl and we have a small salad or a small soup. You make sure there's something in the bottom so that you don't have to fill it with so much of the thing you're photographing. Same thing works when you're building things to photograph with produce. So because the mushrooms, this works really well because your mushrooms are tones of brown. So when you're photographing, like even if I draw your eye to the front right of that top shiitake where the back end's poking up, you can see the brown paper there, but you probably didn't see it before because it's brown and it blends in. So you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff so much. So anyway, and then also you don't need loads of product. So if you have a day that you need to shoot, but you don't have a lot of mushrooms at that particular time, you can still create photos with few mushrooms by doing these kinds of things. So that bowl, those mushrooms are just laid on the top of that paper bag or crumpled paper. We all get orders that have so much paper in a product this big. So I keep all of that paper. Okay. All right, we're going to move on to photographing cooked mushrooms now. And the first thing that I'm going to bring up is you want to place with purpose. And that means you want subject ID. And this is something over the past few years of working with agriculture products and specific foods that I've had to fine tune a lot. And I've learned a lot about it because when you do a shoot, what you constantly hear is, we need ID, we need ID, we need ID. So when you have a mushroom, an onion, or something that you're trying to feature, the person needs to see that so that they know that it's in the recipe. And so with mushrooms, what we do, and well, with everything, but I'll talk here specifically to mushrooms, each of these mushrooms that you're visibly seeing were placed there on purpose. And there's a little bit of an art to it because sometimes we can make things look like they were placed there on purpose. I had this, problem early on when I was trying to master these skills. So it has to draw your attention, but look like it's also part of the recipe and it blends in. So on the salad, you have the mushroom there on the top. That was pulled out. It was wiped down. Like I picked out while I was cooking, you pick out, if you see one that's gorgeous, pull it out and set it aside. And then you can add it back to your photo later. So that, it's pulled out. If it, you dry it off and it looks just a little bit too dry, you can go back and spritz maybe just a little bit of water or add a little bit of oil, but you're really controlling what you're doing here. And I'm not going to lie, you might lay out your recipe and boom, that mushroom is on the top. And if that happens, take your shot and be happy that you didn't spend any more time. That happens too. In the center with the, it's like an instant homemade noodle jar, like lunch jar. Those shiitakes, we pulled one up to the top for that. And then the right is a mushroom soup, actually just a recipe for myself. I used to have a food blog. And with that, what I did is, like, obviously I have chopped mushrooms in there. So as I was cooking, I scooped out and strained some mushrooms. I placed those on a paper towel and let them dry off. Then I strained out the mushrooms, put them in the bowl and piled them high. And then I added the broth to that, making sure that it didn't submerge, all of the mushrooms. And this sounds complicated. This was not a complicated process. It was scoop, scoop, pour, really simple. It's just a couple extra steps instead of just dumping it all in at once. Then I went back and I took those few little mushrooms that I'd had and I laid them across the top. Again, if they looked too dry, like they shouldn't be there, you can spritz them with water. You can take a little bit of the broth and pour it back over, but it allowed the mushrooms to come up and to identify that that is 100% a mushroom soup. So we want people to know what it is. Now, sometimes the ID isn't possible. So a lot of the recipes that I develop for the Mushroom Council, they do blends. So they blend meat with finely chopped mushrooms to like expand it, and health benefits and all of that kind of stuff. So you can't tell when you grind mushrooms into meat that it's mushrooms. So when that happens, add some identification in your propping. So you can see each of these has mushrooms on the side, mushrooms in the back, even though that is out of focus, shallow depth of field on that center image, those are mushrooms. And then on the other, they're in the background as well. So that's when and you can certainly add fresh mushrooms to a shot where and you can identify those mushrooms in the image. But when it's not there and you want people to know it's in there, strategically kind of add those around. And it can be pieces, whatever the case may be. Okay, what I want to talk about now is, so that salad image and the other images that I showed you where those strategically placed mushrooms were. Well, that's part of it. The second part is that you were focused on that area. What you're doing when you do that is you're creating an area within your image that you're going to focus your camera on when you take your shot. And when someone looks at the image, as a result, their eyes are going to go straight to that and they're going to see that mushroom and know that it's a mushroom recipe. So these are the steps this is how we get there. You adjust according to the rule of thirds composition, just kind of adjust it a little bit, know where that mushroom is that you've identified and move it to a spot within that rule of thirds. Obviously, make sure it's been highlighted for identification. Style with the light hitting your hero spot. And I'll show you an example in just a second. So if the light is coming in, you want it to hit, you want your food turned so that the light is hitting that hero mushroom. And then you want to photograph with your hero spot and focus. If you're using a camera, that's your focal point right there. If you're using a phone, use that touch screen and tap on that spot to focus your image. So this is a dish with wild rice and walnuts, maitake mushrooms, and you can probably already see, I'll let you look at it and see if you can tell what my hero spot was, and then I will click forward and explain it just a little bit. So that particular mushroom is the perfect mushroom that I pulled out. It's been placed there. I make sure that the entire dish is turned towards my light source, which is coming from the left in this image. It's been cleaned off a little bit. My focal point, I have a little bit of a shallow depth of field here, but that particular mushroom is in focus. It follows the rule of thirds. The mushroom gets attention, got that left light, and then I photograph the hero spot in focus. And just a few more examples, even when we're photographing with produce, with the fresh mushrooms, you still want to have that hero spot that you're going to focus your image on and that your light is hitting. So we've got the back of this shiitake here. These are kind of like mushroom version of pepperoni pizza rolls. So before I baked them and after they came out, using tweezers to kind of pull, I wanted to make sure they were baked, but sometimes even when you pull them before baking, they'll get covered up. But we had a mushroom, and this particular pan was turned, so we got that mushroom in the shot. And then on the right, those are protein burgers, and made sure that that mushroom was right there on the top there so that we could get a good photo and let people know. Well, the other thing that I wanted to add is that if you're interested in these tips, and a few more thrown in. I do have a Farm Fresh photos tip sheet over at loririce.com. I've got it right up on the page for people who have listened to recent podcast interviews and this particular summit. So if you'd like to have something handy to refer back to, like when you're shooting, feel free to go over there and subscribe to grab that.
Well, that was fabulous. I learned so much, and now I can't wait to take our own mushroom pictures. Actually, my 3-year-old brought in a mushroom today that he found in the yard. It was ended up, I can't pronounce it. That's the only thing I know about the Latin names of them. So it was something that I can only type. I can't pronounce it, but it was edible, is what we found out. I think it's actually called like chicken fat mushroom or something like that. It's a wild one. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, but I was actually just, I was thinking, like listening to you, I was like, I need to go grab that one and I need to actually start like styling it, even though I'm not going to eat it. Get ready. But very cool. Thank you so much for sharing all these tips, and it made me so hungry because all those recipes looked so delicious.
Yeah. That's the problem with working in food and food photography.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the pizza rolls or the pepperoni rolls, that's a very cool idea and very cool recipe. What other ingredients does that have in it?
So it's basic bread recipe. And then actually, I think I used a pizza crust recipe, and then it has the marinara and then the mushrooms in it. And then it's rolled up and, sliced off a lot like cinnamon rolls. Yeah. And then rising in the pan, and then a little bit of, butter on the top, get that glisten, and then served with marinara. So there's just kind of a twist on that. Yeah.
All right. And so your website, if they want to grab that cheat sheet, photos tip sheet, is to go to loririce.com. And Lori, thank you so much again for coming on and sharing all your tips about photos. And if folks haven't, Lori has another presentation that's all about how to write awesome recipes. So make sure you go check that one out. Some great information there as well. We're really thankful for Lori coming on and helping us to learn how to present our mushrooms the best to our customers so we can get more sales and sell more mushrooms.
Yeah, great. Happy to be here. Thanks so much.